We just finished number 3, Ajax 3. Now the next directory, the next code example, is a good one to use for the challenge. So let's look at it. We'll open up number 4, JSON, and we'll look at index.html. Now index.html, this is what we just did before. We set up the object, we set up a function for when it returns, we grab the JSON text, we parse it, turn it back into a JavaScript object, and we can access the JavaScript object normally. Okay, this is what we did before. We're going to comment this code out, and we're going to use jQuery. Now, jQuery has the .get and the .post functions. They also have a nice function for JSON. So they actually have a get JSON method. Now the method is the same as before. The first parameter is where it's going to. Second parameter is optional, which would be parameters you're sending to the server. And the third parameter is the function that gets called when the response is received. So it's just like the .get method and .post method as we saw before, except this one's get JSON. Now, when this function's called, I'm going to have data as a parameter. Now before, data was text, so we had to parse that data. But what's nice about this getJSON method is it's going to parse the data for us automatically. So I can take what I get and I can update the content box, make sure the IDs are spelled the same. I'm going to update the inner HTML to data.name plus a default string has a pet with spaces plus data.pet. Look at all this code get compressed into nice 2-3 lines of code. So what's nice is this JSON parse JavaScript method will be called automatically when this anonymous function is called. So when data comes back, it's already going to be the JavaScript object instead of the JSON string. So then I can access that JavaScript object directly. So let's save this, upload the code to the server, come back and run it. Okay, so I'll go to lectures, go to web services, we're in JSON. I'm going to click on get, and you'll see that Professor Orgles has a pet tiger. Okay, so that JSON comes back. So I click on the button, this function will get called. They have a specialized function for JSON called getJSON. It's going to use a get request, and what the response comes back is it's going to parse the JSON for you automatically. So I'm going to send it to json.php. Data will be the JavaScript object, so I can access that JavaScript object directly. Now let's look at json.php. And this is similar to what you're going to do for the challenge. json.php takes the array and then basically calls the encode method. Okay, so it takes this, this will actually be called associate array in PHP, and it's going to encode that to JSON. So it's going to send back the string, just like we did before. This jQuery method will take that string, parse it, and have a JavaScript object ready for you to use. Okay, now for the challenge, this JavaScript object will actually be a JavaScript array. It's going to be a JSON array instead of just a JSON object. So with the challenge, you'll actually have to have a for loop. Now you could either use a for loop, or in jQuery, they have the for each function call that you can do. Okay, you could either use a for loop or you could use the for each, and you may look up the documentation for this for each. So you wrap this line in the for each. You could probably put an I here if you use a for loop, or if you use the for each, they have a parameter to the function called item. You'll loop through each item here, and then you'll print out each item in the JavaScript array. Okay, but the concept's the same. I'll still use the getJSON method, but I'll just add a for loop here, or the for each method from jQuery and then put this inside that for loop. Okay, either I use the index I or I use the for each, which will take each item already, and then I'll concatenate. Okay, so I'll concatenate to the content box. Now, for JSON, this getJSON method's nice. So I do recommend using jQuery for the JSON part of the challenge. Now, you don't have to. You could use the JavaScript that we showed before, which may be easier for some people. But if you look up the documentation for this getJSON, and you look up the documentation for this each method, then I believe this will be easier. But you have to look up the documentation and see how that method is being used. jQuery is nice, but you have to use the way that they implemented that method. Now, if you use JavaScript, you use your for loop, then you could write the code, and you don't need to learn how the code is written for jQuery. If you use this jQuery and use the function call or the method call, you'll see how much shorter the code is. Now, for XML, they don't have a nice function like this. They don't have a get XML function. So for the XML, jQuery is actually pretty complicated. You have to really read the documentation and understand what's going on. And you have to set up an AJAX request differently. So it's a little bit harder to use. So for the XML, I recommend using the traditional way, which was shown in the previous video. For the JSON, you can use jQuery and make the code much shorter. That's my recommendation. Of course, there's many solutions for the challenge. There's one more code example. If you continue on to the next video, we'll go over that code example and we'll be done for this lecture. We'll see you in the next video.